Humanity, I love you all with all my heart and might. I'm Jam Jose Alonso Molina. Today is a great video. I've been looking forward to this video for a while, and this is a video which is one of the visuals of my first book, Compass and Sundial, The Quest for Infinite Free Will. As a lot of you guys know, I have a hobby, and this hobby is Magic the Gathering, and I play my decks are essentially all my own brews, and they all come in the modern format, which is the format that I learned when I was growing up, when I first was introduced to the game. So I essentially just play that format, and this is a deck. This video is about a deck of this specific format that I love to play, and it's a Boros, which is mountain and plains. You see, it's red and white, and it's Boros. If you play Magic, you know what that means. It's essentially a very fast deck. It has no creatures. So if you know my content, you know that I have already uploaded two of my brews, and they both feature creatures. One is a tribal synergy of elementals, which are creatures, and the other one is essentially very powerful creatures that come together in a very synergistic way to have multiple attack phases in one turn. You can have 2, 3 in one turn, and you have alpha strikes, so you can overwhelm your opponent within a very short clock, few turns, 3 turns, 4 turns. And that's kind of like my background. I've always played with creatures, but I wanted to go all the other way, and that's playing with no creatures. However, I do not like control decks in a way. These tempo decks that are control decks that heavily rely on blue for the way they operate. I love that color. I love islands. I love blue, but it's not something that I particularly like to play daily when I play, because of the way it is, the nature of the color and what it does. I like aggro decks. I like 4-turn wins, just, 5-turn wins, 3-turn wins. And it's hard to get to that with blue. Unless you have like a storm deck and a combo deck that can go off on the 3rd turn. It's very hard to do that in modern, and it's not competitive. And you have to go to vintage and legacy formats to really have the powerful cards that blue have that you can use. And I would love to play with those, but they're not part of the format. So because of that, I focus on the other colors, green, white, black, and red. And if you look at the other two, one is a green red, the other one is a black red, and this one is a white red, which is Boros. And this happens to be my favorite deck because it's just so powerful, because you see, it's just a 4-turn win. It's very powerful. It's very powerful, and it doesn't really require you to it just simplifies and neutralizes and equalizes a lot of the dynamics of the game, because it renders so many cards in so many matchups and in the meta irrelevant, obsolete, really. You cannot interact in a way. So I really like that about the deck. And also, it's just very simple. It's all damage. That's all you do, and then you have a very fast clock, and you do it in a way in which is very simple. You don't have to turn creatures sideways as you do with my previous 2 brews that I showed you. They're part of my book and the channel. and my content. But it's more of a, you know, it's just I have spells in my hand and I'm just gonna cast them. And these spells are essentially burn spells, you know, and that's it. I just do that. And it has an incredible reach, you see, which is one of the keys when you play burn. When you play an aggro deck that is burn, essentially, which has no creatures, you want to make sure that you have reach. A lot of Boros decks and a lot of burn decks and aggro decks that are damage based with fast clocks, they because of the lack of reach, they tend to essentially feature a few powerful creatures, because creatures tend to come later and they tend to be resilient and they tend to keep on going, and you have a presence on the board which gives you that reach, which it's, you know, it gives it like different avenues to get to the end game, you know, to the end state, which is winning. But this one, because of that, I decided to, what is it that I can do that mitigates reach, meaning not having creatures. So I decided to essentially make the entire deck a burn deck, including the lands. So and accelerating with the lands. And if you understand the logic of it, I'm gonna go through the cards in a second. So you would see how is it that it reaches this stage where you still have reach even though there are no creatures on the board, because you have card advantage and you can draw, which is very, you know, it's not what red does if you understand the game, but this deck does. It has card advantage, so, and it's very powerful. So I'll take you through the deck. So this deck features 16 instants. Shard Volley, 4 copies. Boros Charm, 4 copies. Lightning Bolt, 4 copies. And Lightning Helix, 4 copies. The highest converted mana cost or mana value of any spell is 2 mana. You see, and these are Lightning Helix and Boros Charm. It's 1 red and 1 white each, and that's it. Above that, there are no mana value spells worth 3. There's not converted mana cost 3 or more. It's just 2 or less, which is very quick. It's very powerful if you understand the logic of the game and what the deck wants to do. And it's essentially beautiful because you have this incredible ability with Boros, for example, to have this extra damage, which goes a long, long way. And then you have Helix, which is also this mitigator of sorts that allows you to stay and earn an extra turn or 2 just by the nature of having this life gain that you get with it. And it gives you that flexibility. And it's an instant, so you have so many different options in which you could deploy these cards because they're instants, you know. And it's very powerful. And then in terms of sorceries, this deck features 20 sorceries. You see, an extra 4. So it has more sorceries than instants. So there is 4 Rift Bolts, which is a legend. It's my favorite card in this deck. I think what Rift Bolt does is so powerful. So powerful. It's something that cannot be done by any other card in this deck. And I'll dive into it later on. So, and then there is also 4 copies of Boltwave, and there is 4 copies of Lava Spike. You know, it's very powerful. These are direct damage and 1 mana each, so it's powerful, and it's 3 points. It's very powerful. If you add up the math, it adds up very quickly. And then there is Skewer the Critics, which is a very powerful card, particularly with the synergies that Rift Bolt gives you. And I'll get into that in a minute. And then it's Light Up the Stage, which is extremely powerful. There's 4 copies of that, and there's also 4 copies of Skewer the Critics. So what that means is that Light Up the Stage is incredible because it changes. The only reason why this deck is feasible and it has reach and it has this incredible ability to be powerful without having creatures or a board presence is because of light up the stage. Because light up the stage essentially sets up the stage, right? In the sense that it's a drawing engine, it's a card advantage engine, for 1 mana, because this deck only burns, it's only damage. So you will always cause damage to your opponent. You see, it's just part of the deck, it's the design of it. So you would always be able to essentially cast it for less, which is 1 red mana, 1 mountain. And same with Skewer the Critics, right? And it's so flexible and so powerful because you get to have 2 cards, and it's not until the end of turn, it's until the end of the next turn. So you can be in situations in which you're lucky enough to, it happens quite often where you play and then you cast light up the stage, at the end of your turn, at the end of your second main phase. Yeah. Once you essentially tapped out all your lands and that, but you are building up for the next turn. You see? And then you have these 2 cards coming up very powerfully, and it's extremely, extremely good, because sometimes, say, you might not be able to play a land because you didn't have a land in your hand or something. But because you had 1 mana to cast light up the stage, then all of a sudden, when you draw these 2 cards, right, that you can play, then you can play a land immediately. So because this deck runs on 1 land, essentially 1 mana, then you all of a sudden, you at the second, at the end of your turn, then you have this extra mana that you can use for an instant, for example, or for another sorcery. And then you can have incredible reach. And then the next turn, you get to play that second card that's still waiting there, plus you get to draw your normal card. So it's an incredible engine that gives this deck an incredible depth and reach. So very, very powerful dynamics and synergies can happen as a result that are very hard for the opponent to deal with because of where these cards are. Because these cards are not on your hand. Once you play light up the stage, this card is essentially in exile. It's in a different, place. It's almost like a place that the opponent cannot reach. He cannot target it unless you cast them and they have a way to counter it. But having said that, it's very powerful. And if you update dynamics, you see how it just clicks into one sequence of very powerful events. So light up stage is what makes this deck possible. And then there is Enchantments for Seal of Fire. Seal of Fire is just this incredible card that gives you that flexibility for Skewer the Critics and light up the stage. Why? Because you can, once you play this 1 mana drop, right, you're dropping a permanent, right, an enchantment, and you can choose when you use it. So you sacrifice it at the right moment because it can be done at instant speed. You see, it's an ability. And because you have these, then you have these that gives you that flexibility to organize the game around your play. So you force your opponent to, to keep on the back foot, essentially. That's what it does. Seal of Fire is extremely powerful. On paper, you look at the deck and you be like, okay, so yeah, it's a burn deck, it's an aggro deck, it has no creatures, but how could you say that, legendary cards like Lightning Bolt or, Lava Spike are not more powerful than Rift Bolt or Light Up the Stage or Skewer the Critics? Well, or Seal of Fire. Well, because of the dynamics, is the synergies when they come together and the things that they do together. And because you wouldn't be able to do those, you could, but it's more narrow. With like Lightning Bolt and with like Lava Spike, and Boltwave. It's powerful. They're powerful. That's why they're in the deck and they're extremely powerful. But these cards that I mentioned, Rift Bolt, Seal of Fire, Skewer the Critics, and Light Up the Stage, because of the way they interact with each other, it takes the deck to a next level that you wouldn't be able otherwise. And then when you consider that you still have Volley, Boros Charm, Lightning Bolt, Lightning Helix, Boltwave, and Lava Spike, that's an extra 6 spells, right? all burn spells, is like extremely powerful dynamic. So this deck essentially has 40 cards that are burn spells, if you really think about it, because when you play Light Up the Stage, it brings more fire to the engine, right? You're bringing more resources to that end state, which is victory. So, and then lands. If you think of lands, it's 4 mountains, 4 Arid Mesa, because this is a great fetch land, and it's in perfect synchrony with red and white, and then Barbarian Ring, which, my personal opinion, Barbarian Ring changed the meta, and the only reason why this deck is any good at all is because of Barbarian Ring. If this deck didn't have Barbarian Ring, this would be a beatable aggro deck that wins 40%, 45% of the time. But because you have Barbarian Ring, it brings it to a level of, about 55% win rate across the board, all matchups. You see, 4 turn, 5 turn, and sometimes 3 turn kill. But the deck is not a 3 turn kill like I designed, say, my first deck, my GG deck, the Gruul deck. That's a 3 turn kill. And then the other deck is a 4 turn kill that sometimes does a 3 turn kill. This is a stable 4 turn kill that sometimes does a 3 turn based on how many lives the opponent drains itself and self damage. And then a very comfortable 5 turn. But for the most part, about 50% of your games, you're going to have a 4 turn kill, because you're going to have enough damage, an average of 25 points damage, 22 to 25 points in 4 turns. If you add the math and you do the, law of large numbers, and you do the distribution curve of it, the bell curve of it, you will start to see that over an infinite number of games, as you start to game the meta, above 50% of your hands, whether you're on the play or on the draw, they tend to have, by the third turn, around 22 to 25 points of damage, which is extremely powerful if you understand the logic of Magic and what that means, particularly in a format like Modern. And that doesn't mean that after that, that's it. No, because this engine has reach. This deck has reach and has this card advantage that keeps on feeding that. It's not that you get to your 5th turn and you're like, oh, I'm out of gas. The opposite. In fact, you might have 1 or 2 cards in your hand. You might have 2 lands that are powerful dynamics, or you can have, a drawing engine will light up the stage. So it's extremely powerful. It's a very powerful deck. It's an engine to be reckoned with. And then after that, there's 4 Sacred Foundries, which is fundamental, and then Sunbaked Canyon. That's 4 of them, because it's kind of like that draw capacity, right? You have these card advantage, and Sunbaked Canyon is just this perfect card for this for this specific synergy of Boros, which is white and red, because it's just in total alignment with its mana base, and it's just this ability to draw a card. And because this deck relies only on 1 mana drops, 2 mana drops, meaning spells, as in like burn spells and that, you might have 3 cards, 3 lands, which is how this deck operates. It only requires 3 lands, really. But in reality, it requires 2. You can win with 2 comfortably by turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, if you have just all these drawing abilities and all these spells that you're casting, which is very, very, one mana value. So, but if you get, say, to 3 lands, which is great, because the deck has 20 lands, then you have this ability to play incredible, where you just have, say, no hand, right? And you're like in your 5th turn, your 4th turn, or your 6th turn, 7th turn, if it gets to that. And then you can just sacrifice Sunbaked Canyon, and then you draw this card, and the probability of being a 1-drop is very high. So you can play that card, and then you win on the spot. Or just keep on going, which is what you want. That's what the deck does. It's very powerful. It's extremely powerful. So this is the deck, and I hope you love it, because I love it. I think it's extremely powerful, and I call it Boros wins because you'd be surprised the winning rate of this deck. It's off the chart because it's it neutralizes so many cards. It makes so many cards on the opponent's hands in the matchups void, like they cannot target any creatures, or it's like a waste. It's like, and it limits them. And then if they have an aggressive self damage approach to gaining advantage, then it's even more powerful. So it puts the opponent in a very between a rock and a hard place, essentially. And this is where you want to be with an aggro deck. You want to be in that position. You want to be in a situation in which your hand is essentially just deployed in a way in which no matter what the opponent does, you know that you're going to cast your cards. Because if you're not casting your cards and your opponent is dealing with your cards, then the opponent is not really winning because they're trying to stabilize or control. But this deck is anti-blue. It's anti-control because it doesn't care what you do unless you win. And if you're just targeting me, that means that you're not really winning, and I'm gonna keep on drawing cards, and eventually I'm gonna get there. If it becomes one of those matchups that are pesky. But over 3 games in a matchup, you start to realize very quickly that then you have this extremely powerful engine, and then you have this very strategic sideboarding, right? Which is up to the individual. And I always, when I put my decks out, I don't really talk about sideboards because sideboards are meta driven and they're very specific to matchups and regions. So that you can mitigate that by having the right sideboard for the right meta, for the right matchup, for the right tournament, for the right event, for the right region, because it's all based on the what comes with that. But as a foundation, this is a 55 plus winning rate across the board in Modern, which is extremely high if you think about it and how simple it is. And one of the most incredible things about this deck is that it's a fair deck. It's a fair deck. It has cards that cannot be banned in it. And the other one is that it's cheap. If you understand the Modern format, is an expensive format. Lands are very expensive. And the spells in general, the cards are expensive. The permanents are expensive. So when you want to be competitive, right? When you want to have a deck that competes, and he's a 4-3-5 turn kill deck, that you have a good matchup against the board in the meta. So those are very expensive. But if you understand the logic of this deck, it's very affordable. In comparison, even though it's not cheap, it's still pricey. It's 33% to 40% of the cost of a regular deck that most people play, and this deck would beat it 55+% of the time, which is extremely powerful. So it's affordable, and a lot of these cards are very ancient, so most people have these cards already, or the foundation, the base of them. You just have to find maybe 10 cards or so. So it's very affordable, it's friendly, it's easy to learn, the dynamics are simple. There's a lot of mechanics that you don't even have to bother about, and interactions that are irrelevant to the deck because you have no creatures. So it's a very pretty simple on your face type of deck, and it's just a threat. It's just essentially you keep on, you just play threats. You keep on, rather than a permanent, you're just casting spells that just keep on doing what they're supposed to. So it's just this engine, a non-stop engine, and is what it does. It's very powerful. So I hope that everyone out there gives it a go and you play with it because it's incredible. I really love it. I really love it. And particularly against my 2 other decks, it fares okay. It could lose because these other 2 decks are extremely powerful, which is why I created them, because I created them to mitigate Boros, if you understand the logic of it. But this Boros has a fair chance against the other decks as well. So this is a powerful deck. So overall, you could say that this is the most powerful deck that I have put on my book because of what it does and the synergies of it. So this is the video. and I hope you love it. So logic, 4 is greater than 3, 3 is greater than 2, 2 is greater than 1, and this equals Boros wins. So this is the logic of the deck. I'm a mathematician, so I go by logic. And as a logician, when you understand what I mean by 4 greater than 3, 3 greater than 2, and 2 greater than 1 equals winning, you would understand what I mean, because it's based on the design and the structure of the game itself. Okay, have a wonderful day.